3 bodies. No answers. And the one place nobody wants to talk about. Haven City, 1941. The kind of place where neon signs flicker like dying stars and everyone's got something to hide. For weeks now, people have been disappearing. Not the kind of folks you'd expect either. We're talking about city councilmen, small-time crooks, cab drivers, secretaries. Different lives, different worlds, but they all had one thing in common. They were last seen walking through the doors of the Mirror Room, the most exclusive nightclub this side of the state line. Detective Vincent Mallory didn't want this case. Truth is, nobody did. See, the Mirror Room wasn't just some joint where you could grab a drink and dance to swing music. It was connected. Politicians rubbed shoulders with mobsters. Money changed hands under tables draped in silk. And the owner, a man known only as Mr. Glass, had enough dirt on enough people to keep the whole operation running smooth as butter. The police commissioner himself told Vince to leave it alone. But when a case lands on your desk with 3 confirmed dead and 7 more missing, walking away isn't exactly an option. Vince had seen plenty in his 15 years on the force. Murders, robberies, corruption that went all the way to the top. But this was different. The bodies they found weren't killed in some back alley brawl. They were staged. Posed like mannequins in a store window. Each one found in a different part of the city, dressed in their finest clothes, not a mark on them except for one detail that made Vince's skin crawl. Their eyes. Wide open. Staring at nothing. And in each of their pockets, a small mirror, cracked right down the middle. That's when Veronica Vale walked into his life. Ronnie wasn't your typical journalist. She didn't write fluff pieces about society parties or garden clubs. She dug into stories that made editors nervous and politicians sweat. She'd been investigating the Mirror Room for months, collecting whispers and rumors, trying to piece together what really went on behind those velvet curtains. When she heard about the bodies, she knew this was bigger than some gambling operation or prostitution ring. This was something darker. Something that needed to see the light of day. She found Vince at a diner on 8th Street, nursing black coffee and a headache that wouldn't quit. Ronnie slid into the booth across from him without asking, dropping a thick folder on the table between them. "You're the detective on the Mirror Room case," she said. Not a question. Vince looked up, taking in the woman across from him. Red hair pinned back, sharp eyes that missed nothing, and a determination that reminded him why he got into this job in the first place. "And you're the reporter who's been sticking her nose where it doesn't belong." "My nose has been in exactly the right places, which is more than I can say for Haven City's finest." Vince should have told her to beat it. Should have sent her packing before she got herself killed. But instead, he opened that folder. Inside were photographs, newspaper clippings, handwritten notes. Names he recognized. Dates that lined up with the disappearances. And right there in the middle, a photograph of the Mirror Room's entrance, all Art Deco elegance and promise. "How much do you know?" Vince asked. "Enough to know that every person who's gone missing spent their last night at that club. Enough to know that Mr. Glass has connections to people who could make both of us disappear without anyone asking questions. And enough to know that you're not going to walk away from this." She was right about that last part. Vince had tried to get information through official channels. Called in favors, leaned on informants, did everything by the book. But every door he knocked on slammed shut. Every witness suddenly developed amnesia. The message was clear. Stay away from the mirror room. Stay away or else. But Vince had never been good at taking orders. And now, with Ronnie's research spread across the table, patterns started emerging. The victims weren't random. They were all people who knew something. A city councilman who'd been asking questions about zoning permits. A bookkeeper who worked for one of the crime families. A taxi driver who'd overheard the wrong conversation. Each one of them had stumbled onto something they shouldn't have known. And each one of them had gone to the mirror room shortly after. "We need to get inside," Ronnie said. "You think I haven't thought of that? The place has a waiting list 6 months long. You need an invitation from a member, and those members aren't exactly lining up to help the police. So we don't go as police, we go as customers." Vince raised an eyebrow. "You got an invitation tucked in your purse?" Ronnie smiled, the kind of smile that said she'd been planning this for a while. "Better. I've got a name. Thomas Whitmore. He's a regular at the mirror room, goes there twice a week like clockwork. Owns a shipping company down at the docks. Also happens to owe some very dangerous people a lot of money. And he's just going to hand over an invitation. He will if we convince him we can make his problem go away. It wasn't exactly legal. It definitely wasn't by the book. But Vince had learned a long time ago that sometimes you had to bend the rules to get to the truth. And right now, the truth was hiding behind the doors of the mirror room, wrapped in cigarette smoke and lies. They found Thomas Whitmore exactly where Ronnie said he'd be. A bar on the waterfront, the kind of place where dock workers drank away their paychecks and asked no questions. Whitmore was at a corner table, shoulders hunched, nursing a whiskey that looked like it wasn't his first of the night. Vince and Ronnie sat down on either side of him. "We need to talk about your debt," Vince said quietly. Whitmore's face went pale. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Sure you do. You're into the Marconi family for 20 grand. Money you borrowed to keep your business afloat. Money you don't have. Word is they're getting impatient." "Who are you people?" "People who can help," Ronnie said. "We can make your problem disappear. All you have to do is get us into the mirror room." Whitmore laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You're crazy. You know what they'd do to me if they found out I brought cops into that place." "We're not going as cops," Vince said. "Just two people looking for a good time. You introduce us, get us through the door, and then you're done. We take care of the rest. And my debt? Consider it handled." It was a lie. Vince didn't have that kind of pull. But Whitmore was desperate, and desperate people don't ask too many questions. After a long moment, he nodded. "Saturday night. 9 o'clock. Don't be late." The mirror room sat on 5th Street, tucked between a theater and a bank, easy to miss if you didn't know what you were looking for. No big sign, no flashy lights. Just a simple door painted black with a small mirror embedded in the center. The kind of place that wanted to be found only by the right people. Vince wore his best suit, the one he saved for funerals and court appearances. Ronnie had traded her usual practical clothes for an emerald dress that turned heads as they walked up to the door. They looked like they belonged, which was the whole point. Whitmore met them at the entrance, looking like a man on his way to the gallows. "Remember," he whispered, "don't ask questions. Don't stare. And whatever you do, don't mention why you're really here." A doorman built like a brick wall checked their names against a list, then stepped aside. The door opened, and sound washed over them. Music. Laughter. The clink of glasses and the shuffle of dancing feet. But underneath it all, something else. A tension that hung in the air like smoke. Inside, the mirror room lived up to its name. Mirrors covered every wall, reflecting light from crystal chandeliers until the whole place seemed to glow. It made the space feel bigger than it was, infinite almost. Everywhere Vince looked, he saw himself looking back. 100 versions of Detective Vincent Mallory, all of them wondering what they'd gotten themselves into. The main floor was packed. Men in expensive suits sat at tables with women dripping in jewels. A band played on a raised stage, the singer's voice smooth as honey. Waiters in crisp white jackets moved through the crowd with trays of champagne. At first glance, it looked like any other high-end club. But Vince had been a cop long enough to recognize the undercurrents. The men in the corners who watched but didn't drink. The conversations that stopped when strangers walked by. The careful way everyone moved, as if they were all playing parts in a show. "Quite a place," Ronnie murmured. "Quite a trap," Vince replied. Whitmore led him to a table near the back, far from the stage but with a clear view of the room. A waiter appeared instantly, taking their orders without speaking. Everything here ran like a well-oiled machine. "That's Mr. Glass," Whitmore said, nodding toward the far end of the room. Vince followed his gaze. There, at a table elevated slightly above the rest, sat a man who could only be described as unremarkable. Average height, average build, with slicked back hair and glasses that caught the light. He wore a gray suit that probably cost more than Vince made in a year, but otherwise, there was nothing special about him. Nothing that would make you look twice. But everyone in the room was aware of him. Vince could feel it. The way conversations tilted in his direction. The way eyes flickered toward him and then quickly away. This was the man who ran the mirror room. The man whose name made witnesses go silent and case files disappear. "What do you know about him?" Ronnie asked. "Not much, nobody does. He showed up in Haven City about 5 years ago, bought this building, and turned it into the hottest spot in town. Before that..." Whitmore shrugged. "Ghost. No records, no history. It's like he didn't exist before the mirror room." That bothered Vince more than he wanted to admit. In his experience, people who didn't have pasts were usually running from them. They spent the next hour observing. Watching the patterns, the rhythms of the place. Vince noticed how certain guests were escorted through a door behind the bar, disappearing into what must be private rooms. He noticed how money never changed hands openly, how everything was done with subtle nods and quiet words. And he noticed the mirrors. Not just on the walls, but smaller ones on tables, behind the bar, even embedded in the floor. Everywhere you looked, your reflection stared back. "I'm going to try to get backstage," Ronnie said. "See if I can find anything. Not alone. Vince, if we both go, it'll look suspicious. Trust me." Before he could argue, she was gone, weaving through the crowd toward the restrooms. Vince watched her go, every instinct screaming that this was a bad idea. But she was right. They needed information, and they weren't going to get it sitting at a table drinking overpriced champagne. He forced himself to stay calm, to look like just another patron enjoying his evening. But his hand never strayed far from the shoulder holster hidden under his jacket. 15 minutes passed. Then 20. Vince was about to go after her when Ronnie reappeared, her face carefully neutral. She sat down and leaned close. There's a basement. I saw people going down a staircase past the dressing rooms. The door's guarded, but I heard something. Music, but different. Slower. And voices chanting. Chanting? I know how it sounds. But Vince, there's something going on down there. Something they don't want anyone to see. Before Vince could respond, a waiter appeared at their table. Mr. Glass requests your presence. It wasn't a request. They followed the waiter across the room, aware of the eyes tracking their movement. Up close, Mr. Glass was even more ordinary than he'd appeared from a distance. Just a middle-aged man with a pleasant smile and hands that had never done a day of hard labor. Detective Mallory, Mr. Glass said, his voice soft and cultured. Miss Vale, please, sit. So much for their cover. Vince and Ronnie exchanged a glance before taking the offered seats. Mr. Glass poured them each a glass of brandy from a crystal decanter, his movements precise and unhurried. I assume you're wondering how I know who you are, Mr. Glass said. The truth is, I make it my business to know everyone who walks through my door, especially those who come under false pretenses. We're just here for a drink, Ronnie said. Mr. Glass smiled. Miss Vale, you've been investigating my establishment for months. Detective Mallory, you've been assigned to a case involving some unfortunate disappearances. And now here you both are, in my club, pretending to be something you're not. I find that terribly interesting. Vince decided to cut through the games. People are dying. People who've been here. People die every day, detective. It's the nature of life. What makes you think their deaths have anything to do with the mirror room? Because every single one of them was here the night they disappeared. Because they all turned up dead with mirrors in their pockets. And because everyone in this city seems terrified to say your name out loud. For just a moment, something flickered behind Mr. Glass's eyes. Something cold and ancient that didn't match his pleasant smile. You're making accusations based on coincidence. My club is popular. Many people come here. If some of them meet unfortunate ends afterward, that's hardly my responsibility. Then you won't mind if we look around, Ronnie said. I'm afraid I do mind. This is a private establishment. Members only. And while I've been gracious enough to allow you to stay for a drink, I must insist that you leave once you've finished. Unless, of course, you have a warrant. Do you have a warrant, detective? Vince didn't. They both knew it. Mr. Glass stood, smoothing his jacket. I hope you've enjoyed your evening. Gerald will show you out. The brick wall doorman appeared at their table, making it clear the conversation was over. Vince and Ronnie had no choice but to leave, aware that they'd just tipped their hand and learned almost nothing in return. Outside, the night air felt thick after the controlled atmosphere of the club. They walked in silence for 2 blocks before Ronnie finally spoke. He knew we were coming. Someone tipped him off. Whitmore. Maybe. Or maybe he really does know everyone who walks through his door. Either way, we're not getting back in there the normal way. Vince lit a cigarette, his mind racing. You said there was a basement. Another entrance, possibly. But Vince, even if we find a way in, what then? We don't have backup. We don't have authorization. If something goes wrong, people are dying, Ronnie. And whatever's happening in that club is why. I'm not walking away from this. She studied him for a long moment, then nodded. Okay. So what's the plan? The plan, such as it was, involved a lot of guesswork and a little bit of luck. Haven City's downtown was built on top of a network of old tunnels, remnants from Prohibition when speakeasies and smuggling operations ran rampant. Most of the tunnels had been sealed up or collapsed over the years, but Vince knew a few that still connected to basements of older buildings. If the mirror room had been built on one of those sites, there might be a way in from below. They spent the next day at the city archives, pulling building records and old maps. Ronnie had a knack for research, piecing together information that seemed unrelated until suddenly it all clicked into place. The building that housed the mirror room had been constructed in 1929, right before the stock market crash. Before that, the site had held a theater. And before that, going back to the turn of the century, a church. A church, Ronnie said, tapping the old photograph. That's interesting. Why? Because churches in that era often had crypts. Underground rooms for burial and ceremonies. If those spaces still exist under the mirror room, that could be what I saw people going down to. It made a sick kind of sense. Old bones hidden under new paint. The past buried but not forgotten. They found the tunnel entrance 3 blocks away, in the basement of an abandoned warehouse. The door had been chained shut, but Vince's bolt cutters made quick work of that. Inside, the air smelled of mold and stagnant water. Their flashlights cut through darkness that felt solid, revealing walls slick with moisture and floors covered in decades of debris. "You sure about this?" Ronnie asked. "No, but we're doing it anyway." They moved carefully, following the tunnel as it sloped downward. The architecture changed as they went, newer brick giving way to older stone. At one point, they passed through a section where the walls were lined with niches, empty now but clearly meant to hold bodies. The old church crypt, repurposed by bootleggers and now forgotten by everyone except rats and roaches. After what felt like an hour but was probably only 20 minutes, they heard it. Music. Faint but unmistakable. The same swing rhythms they'd heard upstairs at the mirror room, but distorted by distance and stone. The tunnel ended at a wall. Not collapsed, but deliberately bricked up. Someone had wanted to seal this passage. But time and moisture had done their work. Several of the bricks had loosened, creating a gap just large enough for a person to squeeze through. Vince went first, scraping his shoulders against rough stone. On the other side, he found himself in a cellar that clearly predated the mirror room. Old wooden barrels lined the walls. Broken furniture sat in corners. And at the far end, a newer door with light seeping underneath. Ronnie squeezed through behind him. "We're under the club." "Yeah. Stay close." The door wasn't locked. Why would it be? No one was supposed to be down here. It opened onto a narrow corridor, dimly lit by electric bulbs strung along the ceiling. The music was louder now, along with voices. Laughter. The clink of glasses. They moved down the corridor, following the sound. It led to a staircase going up, which they avoided, and another door to their right. This one had a small window set into it at eye level. Vince peered through. What he saw made his blood run cold. The room beyond was large, probably taking up most of the building's basement. It had been renovated recently, the old stone walls hidden behind dark wood panels and rich carpeting. But that's not what caught Vince's attention. It was the people. Dozens of them, all wearing masks. Not costume masks, but simple black ones that covered the upper half of their faces. They stood in a circle around something Vince couldn't quite see, their bodies swaying to music that wasn't the swing from upstairs. This was older. Stranger. A melody that seemed to crawl under his skin and make him want to look away. In the center of the circle, someone was dancing. A woman in a white dress, spinning and turning with movements that were both beautiful and wrong. Her eyes were closed, her face slack, as if she wasn't quite conscious. As if she were a puppet and someone else held the strings. "What is this?" Ronnie whispered beside him. Before Vince could answer, the music stopped. The woman collapsed. And the masked figures stepped back, revealing what sat behind her. An altar. Made of mirrors. Not just covered in mirrors, but built from them. Hundreds of small mirrors fitted together to create a structure that reflected and fractured the light until the whole thing seemed to shimmer and shift. And standing in front of the altar, no longer wearing his pleasant smile, was Mr. Glass. He spoke in a language Vince didn't recognize. The words seemed to hang in the air, heavy with meaning that his brain refused to process. The masked figures responded, their voices joining his in a chant that made Vince's teeth ache. Then Mr. Glass reached down and helped the woman to her feet. She opened her eyes, but they were empty. Vacant. The same look Vince had seen on the bodies. "We need to stop this," Ronnie said. "We need to get evidence first. No one's going to believe us without proof." Ronnie was already digging a small camera from her bag, one of those new compact models that didn't need a flash. She raised it to the window, the shutter clicking softly. Once. Twice. 3 times. On the third click, one of the masked figures looked up. Straight at the window. Straight at them. "Run," Vince said. They bolted back down the corridor, footsteps echoing off stone. Behind them, doors crashed open. Shouts filled the air. They hit the cellar at full speed, diving through the gap in the wall. Vince's jacket caught on the rough stone, tearing, but he yanked himself through. Ronnie was right behind him, her dress ripped and her hair wild. The tunnel felt longer running back. Every shadow could be a pursuer. Every sound could be someone closing in. But they made it to the warehouse, bursting out into the basement and scrambling up the stairs to street level. They didn't stop running until they were 6 blocks away, tucked into an alley where they could catch their breath and check if they'd been followed. "Did you get the photos?" Vince gasped. Ronnie held up the camera, her hands shaking. "Yeah, I got them. Then we need to develop them and get them to the right people. People who can't be bought or threatened." "Who exactly do you have in mind? You said yourself that Mr. Glass has connections everywhere." Vince thought for a moment. "The Federal Boys. FBI. They've been wanting to get their hooks into Haven City's corruption for years. This is their ticket in." It took them 3 days to get the photos developed and contact the right people. 3 days during which Vince barely slept, jumping at every sound, expecting Mr. Glass's people to come crashing through his door at any moment. But nothing happened. No threats. No visits. It was like the whole incident had never occurred. That bothered Vince more than an outright attack would have. The FBI agent who finally agreed to meet them was named Sullivan. Young, serious, with the kind of by-the-book attitude that made Vince simultaneously hopeful and nervous. They met at a diner on the edge of town, far from the mirror room and its reach. Ronnie spread the photographs across the table. They'd come out grainy and dark, but clear enough. The masked figures. The altar of mirrors. And most damning, Mr. Glass performing what could only be described as some kind of ritual. Sullivan studied them for a long time. These are from where exactly? The basement of the Mirror Room, a nightclub on 5th Street. And you obtained them how? Through an investigation into multiple disappearances and deaths. An official investigation. Vince hesitated. Not exactly. Sullivan sat back, his expression unreadable. So you're telling me you broke into a private establishment, without a warrant, and took unauthorized photographs of what appears to be a private gathering. Those people are victims, Ronnie cut in. Whatever's happening in that basement, it's not consensual. We have witnesses who've disappeared after visiting the club. We have bodies with mysterious causes of death. This is bigger than breaking and entering. Maybe it is. But the problem is, I can't use any of this. These photos are inadmissible. Anything we found based on them would be inadmissible. You understand what I'm saying? So you're not going to help, Vince said flatly. I'm saying this isn't enough. You want to bring down someone as connected as Mr. Glass. You need more than some grainy photos and a theory about rituals. You need witnesses willing to testify. You need physical evidence that can be legally obtained. You need a case that will hold up in court. Vince felt his frustration boiling over. People are dying. Then find me proof that can actually put him away. They left the diner empty-handed and out of options. The photos that had nearly gotten him killed were worthless in the eyes of the law. And without federal support, going after Mr. Glass officially would be suicide. So what now? Ronnie asked. Now we find a witness. Someone who was in that basement and lived to tell about it. It was easier said than done. Most of the people who'd been to the Mirror Room and survived weren't talking. Fear kept them silent. But Vince and Ronnie kept digging, kept asking questions, kept following the thin threads that connected the victims. Finally, they found her. Sarah Jennings. A secretary who'd disappeared 3 weeks earlier and turned up 2 days later with no memory of where she'd been. The official report said she'd been drunk and confused. But when Vince and Ronnie tracked her down to her sister's house on the outskirts of town, they saw something in her eyes that wasn't confusion. It was terror. Miss Jennings, my name is Vincent Mallory. I'm a detective with— I know who you are, Sarah interrupted. And I know why you're here. The answer is no. We haven't even asked a question yet. You want me to talk about the Mirror Room? About what happened there? I can't. Can't or won't. Sarah's hands were shaking. She wrapped them around a cup of tea her sister had brought, as if the warmth could chase away whatever memories haunted her. You don't understand what he is, what he can do. Then help us understand, Ronnie said gently. Please. Other people are dying. Whatever happened to you, it's happening to them too. For a long moment, Sarah said nothing. Then, slowly, she began to speak. I went to the Mirror Room with my boss. He was meeting some clients and wanted me there to take notes. We had dinner upstairs, drinks, everything normal. Then Mr. Glass invited us to a private party in the basement. My boss was honored. Everyone wants access to the private parties. That's where the real deals get made, the real connections happen. So we went down. She paused, her eyes distant. At first, it was like the room upstairs. Fancy. Exclusive. People in beautiful clothes drinking expensive champagne. But then the music changed. And someone brought out the mirrors. They started passing them around, telling us to look into them. To see our true selves. I thought it was just some wealthy people nonsense, you know. Rich folks doing weird things because they're bored. But when I looked into the mirror, I saw something else. Not my reflection. Something behind it. Moving. What kind of something? Vince asked. I don't know. Shapes. Shadows. Things that shouldn't exist. And I heard Mr. Glass's voice in my head, telling me to let go. To surrender. To step through. Step through the mirror, Sarah nodded. That's when I blacked out. The next thing I remember, I was waking up in an alley 2 days later. But I have dreams now. Terrible dreams where I'm still there, in that room, looking into the mirror. And in the dreams, I can see the others. All the people who didn't wake up. They're trapped. Stuck in whatever's on the other side of those mirrors. Vince and Ronnie exchanged glances. It sounded insane. Impossible. But they'd seen the altar. The ritual. And they'd seen the empty eyes of the victims. Will you testify to this? Vince asked. Tell what you know to the authorities. Who would believe me? I barely believe it myself. And even if someone did listen, it wouldn't matter. Mr. Glass owns this city. Judges, politicians, police. He has something on everyone that matters. That's what the mirror room is really for. He learns people's secrets. Their fears. Their darkest desires. And then he uses that information to control them. Not everyone, Ronnie said. We're not controlled, not yet. But you've been there. You've seen the mirrors. That means you're marked. Eventually, he'll come for you too. They left Sarah's house with more questions than answers. If what she said was true, and Vince was increasingly convinced it was, then the mirror room was something far stranger and more dangerous than a simple criminal operation. It was something that defied rational explanation. But rational or not, people were dying. And Vince wasn't about to let that continue. We need to destroy the altar, he said as they drove back toward the city. Whatever power Mr. Glass has, it comes from those mirrors. Break the mirrors, break his hold. That's assuming we can get back in. He'll have that tunnel sealed up by now. And there's no way we're getting through the front door again. Then we'll make our own entrance. The plan was desperate and probably stupid, but it was the only one they had. The mirror room closed at 3 in the morning. After that, there would be a brief window where the staff would be gone and the building empty, before whatever Mr. Glass did with his victims in the basement began again. That's when they'd strike. Vince called in every favor he had, gathering a small group of cops he trusted. Men who'd worked with him for years, who weren't on anyone's payroll but the city's. There were only 4 of them, but it would have to be enough. They met 2 blocks from the mirror room at 3:30 in the morning. The street was empty, the windows of nearby buildings dark. Vince laid out the plan. Hit the building from the back entrance, the one the staff used for deliveries. Move fast, get to the basement, destroy the altar before Mr. Glass could stop them. What about warrants? One of the cops asked. We'll worry about that later. Right now, we're preventing additional crimes. That's our justification. It was flimsy and they all knew it. But sometimes you had to act first and deal with the consequences after. They moved in at 3:45. The back door was locked but not alarmed. Vince's lockpick made quick work of it. Inside, the club was dark and quiet, the festive atmosphere from earlier replaced by an eerie emptiness. Mirrors on the walls reflected their flashlight beams, creating the illusion of dozens of cops moving through the space. The door to the basement was locked too, but more substantially. Steel core, multiple deadbolts. It took precious minutes to get through, time they couldn't afford. Every second they spent here was a second Mr. Glass might discover them. Finally, the door opened. The stairs descended into darkness. Vince led the way, his service revolver drawn. Behind him, he heard the other cops breathing, their footsteps careful on the wooden steps. Ronnie had wanted to come, but he'd put his foot down. This was police business now. Dangerous business. At the bottom of the stairs, they found the corridor Vince and Ronnie had discovered before. But something was different. The lights were all on now. And music drifted from the room at the end. The same strange, skin-crawling melody from before. "He knows we're here," one of the cops whispered. "Doesn't matter. We finish this." They moved down the corridor and burst through the door into the basement room. What they found stopped them cold. The room was full. Not with masked figures this time, but with people Vince recognized. City councilmen. Business owners. Judges. Police officers, including 2 captains from his own precinct. All standing motionless, their eyes vacant and staring. And in front of them all, standing beside his altar of mirrors, was Mr. Glass. "Detective Mallory," he said pleasantly. "I've been expecting you." "It's over," Vince said, raising his gun. "Whatever you're doing here, it ends now." Mr. Glass smiled. "Does it? Look around you, detective. These people are the backbone of Haven City. They make the decisions. They enforce the laws. They control the money. And they all belong to me now. Every single one of them looked into my mirrors and gave themselves over. You can destroy the altar if you like, but it won't change anything. The seeds have been planted. The reflections have been seen. They're already lost. You're under arrest for murder, kidnapping, and more counts than I can count right now. Arrest me. With what evidence? These people will testify they were here of their own free will. The ones who died. Tragic accidents. Suicides. Nothing to do with me. You have no case, detective. You have no proof. All you have are stories that no one will believe and photographs that were illegally obtained. He was right. Vince could see it in the empty eyes of the city's powerful. They'd back whatever story Mr. Glass told them to tell. The truth would be buried under layers of lies and legal maneuvering. But Vince had one card left to play. Maybe I can't arrest you. Maybe you're right about all of it. But I can still destroy that altar. And I can make sure no one else falls into your trap. You could try, Mr. Glass said. But I wonder, detective, have you looked in a mirror recently? Vince felt cold dread wash over him. The mirror room. He'd been surrounded by mirrors upstairs. He'd looked at his own reflection dozens of times without thinking about it. That's right, Mr. Glass continued. You've already been marked. Every time you see your reflection now, a little piece of you slips away. Eventually, You'll be just like them. Empty. Obedient. Mine. Maybe, but not yet. Vince fired 3 shots into the altar. The mirrors shattered, fragments exploding outward in a spray of glass. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space, like 1,000 windows breaking at once. Light seemed to bleed from the broken mirrors, not normal light, but something dark and wrong that made Vince's eyes hurt to look at. The vacant-eyed figures all turned as one to look at the destruction. For just a moment, something flickered in their faces. Recognition maybe. Or horror at what they'd become. Then the room went dark. Completely, utterly dark. Vince's flashlight was dead. So were the lights. Even the strange glow from the broken mirrors had vanished. In the darkness, Vince heard breathing all around him. Too much breathing. Too many bodies in too small a space. Fall back, he shouted to his men. Everyone out, now. They stumbled toward where the door should be, hands outstretched, colliding with furniture and each other. Someone grabbed Vince's arm and he almost fired before recognizing the grip of one of his officers. They formed a human chain, pulling each other through the darkness. Behind them, Mr. Glass's voice echoed through the basement. Not angry. Almost amused. You've made things interesting, detective. I'll give you that. But you can't destroy what you don't understand. The mirrors were just tools. Conduits. The real power lives in reflection itself. In the space between what we are and what we see. You've smashed a few pieces of glass. Congratulations. But every mirror in this city still shows your face. And I own 'em all. Vince's hand found the doorframe. They poured through, scrambling up the stairs. The darkness followed them like something alive, reaching with invisible fingers. They burst out of the stairwell and into the main club, where streetlight from the windows provided just enough illumination to see. Keep moving, Vince ordered. They made it to the back door and out into the alley. Fresh air hit Vince's lungs and he realized he'd been holding his breath. All 4 cops had made it out. They stood gasping, adrenaline crashing, trying to process what had just happened. What the hell was that? One of them asked. I don't know, but we're not done. Vince pulled out his radio and called for backup. Fire department too. If he couldn't arrest Mr. Glass, he'd at least make sure the mirror room burned to the ground. Take away his base of operations. Force him into the light where he couldn't hide. But when the backup arrived 30 minutes later, accompanied by fire trucks and half the night shift, they found something impossible. The mirror room was gone. Not burned. Not collapsed. Simply gone. Where the nightclub had stood for 5 years, there was now just an empty lot. Overgrown with weeds. A rusted chain-link fence around the perimeter. A faded sign saying the property was available for lease. This is the right address, one of the responding officers said, checking his notes. 5th Street, between the theater and the bank. But there's nothing here. There was a building here an hour ago, Vince insisted. A nightclub? We were just inside. The officer gave him a look that said he thought Vince had lost his mind. Hell, maybe he had. The 4 cops who'd been with him backed up his story, but their certainty wavered when faced with the empty lot. Had they really been inside a building? Or had it been something else? Something that just looked like a building? Vince turned to examine the neighboring structures, hoping for some clue, some proof that the mirror room had existed. The theater on the left was dark, locked up for the night. But the bank on the right had a night watchman. Vince pounded on the door until an elderly man in a uniform appeared. "The building next door," Vince said. "The nightclub? When did it close?" The watchman looked confused. "Nightclub? Son, there hasn't been anything in that lot for 10 years. Not since the old boarding house burned down. Developers keep trying to sell it, but nothing sticks. People say it's cursed." Vince felt reality slipping. He looked at the empty lot, then at the cops around him, then at his own hands. They were shaking. "It was here," he said quietly. It was real, but as dawn broke over Haven City, painting the sky in shades of gray and pink, Vince had to face the possibility that nothing about the mirror room had been real in any conventional sense. And that made it so much worse. Because if the building could appear and disappear, if Mr. Glass could make an entire nightclub cease to exist, then what else could he do? The official report called it a mass hallucination. Stress-induced psychosis brought on by the pressure of the case. Vince and the 4 officers who'd been with him were put on administrative leave, pending psychological evaluation. The investigation into the disappearances was quietly shelved. The bodies that had been found were attributed to unrelated incidents. The missing persons cases went cold. Within a week, it was as if none of it had ever happened. Except Vince knew better. And so did Ronnie. They met at the same diner where they'd first joined forces, a week after the night the mirror room vanished. Both of them looked like they hadn't slept. Both of them jumped at shadows. "I've been going through old newspapers," Ronnie said, spreading printouts across the table. "Looking for any mention of similar incidents. Disappearances connected to nightclubs or entertainment venues. You know what I found?" "What?" "Patterns. Going back decades. Different cities, different names, but always the same story. An exclusive club opens. People start disappearing. Then the club vanishes and everyone forgets it existed. New York in 1923. Chicago in 1931. Los Angeles in 1936. And now Haven City in 1941. So this has happened before. Multiple times. Which means Mr. Glass, or whatever he really is, has been doing this for a long time. And he'll do it again. Somewhere else. Some other city where people are desperate enough or ambitious enough to walk through his door." Vince rubbed his eyes. He'd barely looked in a mirror since that night, terrified of what he might see staring back. When he did have to look, getting dressed or shaving, he made it quick. Never meeting his own gaze for more than a second. He'd noticed his reflection seemed wrong somehow. The eyes a little too empty. The smile not quite reaching where it should. "Sarah Jennings was right," he said. "We're marked. It's only a matter of time before we end up like the others. Maybe. Or maybe we can fight it. We know what he is now. What he does. That has to count for something. Does it? The city doesn't want to know the truth. They've got their explanations and they're sticking to them. We're the crazy ones. The ones who need help." Ronnie leaned forward, her eyes intense. "So we document it. Everything we know, everything we've seen. We write it down and we make sure someone has access to it. So the next time this happens, whenever it happens, someone will have a head start. They'll know what they're dealing with. It wasn't much. It didn't save the people who'd already died. It didn't bring the mirror room crashing down or put Mr. Glass behind bars. But it was something. A small act of defiance against the darkness. They spent the next 2 weeks writing everything down. Detailed accounts of the investigation. Copies of the photographs, the research, the witness statements. They made multiple copies and stashed them in different locations. Safety deposit boxes. With trusted friends. Buried in archives where someone might eventually find them. And then they waited. Vince went back to work after his psych eval came back clean. The evaluator had chalked up the incident to stress and overwork. Recommended some time off and regular sleep. Vince nodded and agreed and took the pills they prescribed, even though he knew they wouldn't help. You couldn't medicate away the truth. He was assigned to different cases. Burglaries and domestic disputes. Safe, normal crimes with rational explanations and clear solutions. His captain watched him carefully for a while, making sure he wasn't cracking up. Eventually, the attention faded. Vince became just another detective again. The weird incident was forgotten. But Vince didn't forget. He watched the mirrors in his apartment. Covered most of them with sheets, leaving only the small one in the bathroom for necessary grooming. He avoided reflective surfaces on the street. Store windows. Puddles of water. The polished chrome of parked cars. Anywhere he might catch a glimpse of himself and see something else looking back. Ronnie continued her journalism, but she stopped investigating the mirror room. There was nothing to investigate anyway. The building didn't exist. The people who'd been there either couldn't remember or wouldn't talk. The story had no ending because it had never officially begun. She'd call Vince sometimes, late at night, when the darkness pressed too close and the memories felt too real. They'd talk about normal things. Movies they'd seen. Books they were reading. Anything to remind themselves that the ordinary world still existed. That not everything was smoke and mirrors. 3 months after the mirror room vanished, Vince got a call from the hospital. Sarah Jennings had been found in her apartment, dead from an apparent suicide. But when Vince went to the scene, he saw the truth everyone else missed. She was posed. Sitting upright in a chair, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes open and staring at nothing. And on the table in front of her, a small mirror, cracked down the middle. The official cause of death was overdose. Self-inflicted. Case closed. Vince stood in that apartment for a long time, looking at Sarah's empty eyes and knowing that Mr. Glass had reached her. That whatever protection she'd thought she had, whatever time she'd bought by staying silent, it hadn't been enough. He'd found her through the mirrors. Through the reflections. Through the thin barrier between the real world and whatever existed on the other side. He called Ronnie from a payphone. "He's still here," Vince said. "The building might be gone, but he's still here. Still killing people." "What do we do?" "I don't know. But we keep documenting. We keep watching. And we make sure that when he surfaces again, we're ready." But weeks turned into months and nothing happened. No new disappearances. No sightings of Mr. Glass. It was as if he'd faded away with his nightclub, returning to whatever dark place he'd come from. Vince started to relax. Started to think maybe it was over. Maybe destroying the altar had been enough. Maybe Mr. Glass had moved on to easier prey in some other city. Then one morning, Vince woke up and went to the bathroom to shave. He looked in the small mirror above the sink, the one he couldn't avoid, and saw something that made his blood freeze. His reflection was smiling. He wasn't. For just a second, maybe two, his reflection moved independently. The smile widened. The eyes crinkled with amusement. And behind the reflection, in the silvered space of the mirror, Vince saw them. All the people who'd disappeared. All the victims. Standing in rows like an audience, their empty eyes watching him. Then it was gone. Just his normal reflection staring back, pale and frightened. Vince dropped the razor. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely turn on the faucet. He splashed cold water on his face, trying to calm his racing heart. When he looked up again, everything was normal. Just him. Just his reflection. Nothing else. But he knew what he'd seen. And he knew what it meant. The mirror room might be gone, but Mr. Glass's reach extended beyond any single location. The mirrors themselves were the gateway. Every reflective surface in the city was potentially under his control. And Vince, by investigating, by destroying the altar, by marking himself, had become part of Mr. Glass's collection. It was just a matter of time before he was pulled through completely. He called Ronnie immediately. She answered on the first ring, her voice rough with fear. "You saw it too," Vince said. "Not a question. My bathroom mirror. This morning. My reflection moved without me. And I saw them, Vince. All the people who've disappeared. They're trapped. Stuck in the reflection. We need to finish this. Find Mr. Glass and end it, before it's too late." "How?" "We don't know where he is. We don't even know what he is." Vince thought about the research Ronnie had done. The pattern of nightclubs appearing and disappearing across different cities over decades. The consistent reports of people vanishing. The mirrors always at the center of it. "The mirrors are the connection," he said. "He uses them to travel, to exist. What if we could trap him the same way he traps his victims? Lure him into a reflection and break it before he can escape. That's assuming we can lure him anywhere. He's been one step ahead of us this whole time. Because we've been trying to investigate him. Expose him. What if we give him what he wants instead? Which is us. We're marked. He's been playing with us, making us afraid. But what if we walk into the trap willingly? Make him think we've given up. That we're ready to surrender." It was insane. Suicidal probably. But Vince couldn't think of any other option. They could run, try to avoid mirrors for the rest of their lives. But eventually, they'd slip. Eventually, they'd see their reflection and it would reach out and pull him through. Better to face it head on. To go down fighting. Ronnie was quiet for a long time. Then, "Okay. But we do this smart. We prepare. We make sure there's a record of what happened, even if we don't make it out." They spent the next week getting ready. Vince wrote letters to people he trusted, explaining everything. Ronnie did the same. They made copies of all their evidence and distributed them widely. If they disappeared, at least the truth would survive them. Then they picked their battlefield. The old church that had stood on the site of the mirror room was still documented in city records. The building was long gone, but the crypt remained, sealed beneath the empty lot. If there was any place where Mr. Glass's power would be concentrated, where the barrier between worlds would be thinnest, it was there. They went in the middle of the day. Noon, when the sun was highest and shadows were shortest. Vince brought his service revolver, even though he doubted bullets would do much good. Ronnie brought her camera and a small sledgehammer. If they found mirrors, they'd destroy them. The lot looked exactly as it had the last time Vince saw it. Overgrown. Abandoned. The chain-link fence hung loose in places. They slipped through easily and made their way to the center of the space. According to the old building plans, the entrance to the crypt should be right here, Ronnie said, consulting a map. They dug through the weeds and found it. A stone cover, heavy and weathered, with symbols carved into its surface. The symbols looked old. Older than the church. Older than the city. They reminded Vince of the chanting he'd heard in the mirror room's basement. Words from a language that predated English. Together, they pried the cover aside. Beneath was darkness and a ladder leading down. Vince went first. The ladder was old but solid, iron rungs bolted into the stone. He descended into cool darkness, his flashlight cutting a weak path through the gloom. At the bottom, maybe 20 feet down, he found himself in a narrow tunnel. Ronnie climbed down after him. They stood together in the darkness, listening. Somewhere ahead, water dripped. And underneath it, so faint Vince almost missed it, the sound of music. They followed the tunnel as it widened into a chamber. The old church crypt, exactly as the maps had shown. Stone alcoves lined the walls, meant to hold the dead. Most were empty now, the bodies long since relocated or turned to dust. But at the far end of the chamber, something gleamed in the flashlight beam. Mirrors. Not just one or two, but dozens of them. All sizes, all shapes, propped against the walls and laid on the floor. Some were ancient, the silver backing tarnished and spotted. Others looked new, their surfaces perfect and unblemished. Together, they created a forest of reflection, turning the chamber into an infinite space that stretched in all directions. "This is it," Ronnie whispered. "This is where he keeps them." Vince stepped closer to the nearest mirror and looked into it. His reflection looked back, and behind him, shadowy figures. The victims. The disappeared. All trapped in the space between reality and reflection. "We should destroy them," Vince said. "Break every single one." "Wait." Ronnie grabbed his arm. "If we break the mirrors while people are trapped inside, what happens to them? Do they get free or do they get destroyed along with the glass?" It was a good question. One Vince didn't have an answer to. Before he could respond, the music grew louder. The same strange melody from the mirror room. And in the mirrors, movement. Not the victims. Something else. Mr. Glass stepped out of the largest mirror. He didn't climb through or push aside glass. He simply emerged, as if the mirror were a door and he'd been standing just on the other side. In the confined space of the crypt, illuminated by flashlight and the strange glow from the mirrors, he looked different. Less human. His edges seemed to blur and shift. His face, always so ordinary, now appeared almost featureless. A blank mask that could become anyone. Detective Mallory. Miss Vale. Welcome to my collection. Vince raised his gun. Let them go. All of them. The people you've trapped. Mr. Glass tilted his head, the gesture almost curious. Let them go. But they came willingly. They looked into the mirrors of their own free will. They saw the truth of themselves and couldn't look away. I didn't force them. I simply showed them what was already there. You manipulated them, used their weaknesses against them. I gave them what they wanted. Power. Secrets. A glimpse behind the curtain of reality. Is it my fault they couldn't handle what they found? Ronnie had been slowly moving to the side, positioning herself near the collection of mirrors. Now she raised the sledgehammer. If we destroy these, do they go free, Mr. Glass's attention shifted to her. For the first time, something like concern crossed his features. You don't want to do that. Why not? Because the mirrors don't create the trap. They're simply windows into a space that already exists. The space between what is and what appears to be. Break the glass and you don't destroy that space. You just seal it shut. Forever. With everyone still inside. You're lying, Vince said. Am I? Think about it, detective. Where do reflections go when you break a mirror? They don't vanish. They don't die. They simply stop being visible. But they're still there, in that in-between place. Trapped without even a window to look through. Unable to see out. Unable to be seen. Conscious but alone in the dark for eternity. Vince felt sick. If Mr. Glass was telling the truth, and Vince suspected he was, then destroying the mirrors wouldn't save anyone. It would doom them to a fate worse than what they already endured. So what do you want? Vince asked. Why show us this? Because you're still fighting. Still resisting. And that interests me. Most people, once they're marked, they give in quickly. Let themselves be pulled through. But you too, you keep struggling. I want to know why. Because we're not willing to give up, Ronnie said. Not on ourselves and not on the people you've taken. How noble. And pointless. But I'll make you an offer. A chance to save them all. Everyone trapped in my mirrors. Every soul that's been caught between worlds. What kind of offer, Mr. Glass gestured to the largest mirror, the one he'd emerged from. Play my game. Both of you enter the mirror voluntarily. Navigate the reflection space. If you can find your way to the center, to the heart of where I keep my collection, you can free them all. Every victim. Every disappeared person. They all go home. And if we fail, then you join them. Permanently. No more chances. No more resistance. You become part of my collection forever. Vince and Ronnie looked at each other. It was obviously a trap. Mr. Glass didn't make offers out of kindness. He had something to gain from this. But what choice did they have? Walk away and wait to be pulled through eventually? Or take the chance, slim as it was, to actually save the victims? How do we know you'll keep your word? Ronnie asked. Mr. Glass smiled. You don't. You'll have to trust me. Trust a monster, Vince said flatly. Trust that I'm bound by certain rules. The mirrors show truth. They don't lie. If I promise something within the reflection space, I must honor it. That's the nature of what I am. I can deceive, manipulate, and trick. But I cannot break an oath made in front of the mirrors. Vince wanted to believe it was a lie. But some instinct told him Mr. Glass was being honest about this, at least. Whatever he was, whatever power he commanded, it came with rules. Limitations. And oaths made in the presence of mirrors were binding. If we do this, Vince said, you let everyone go. Not just the ones currently trapped. Everyone you've ever taken. In every city. Every victim from every mirror room you've ever created. Mr. Glass's smile widened. Ambitious. But yes. I agree. Win my game and I release them all. What's the game? Simple. You enter the mirror. You find the center. But the reflection space isn't like the real world. It's a maze of possibilities. Every mirror shows a different path. Every reflection a different choice. Most people get lost immediately. They see versions of themselves, versions of their lives, and they can't tell what's real anymore. They wander forever, chasing ghosts. But if you can stay focused, if you can remember who you are and what you're fighting for, you might find the way through. And you're just going to let us try? No interference? Oh, I'll be there. The reflection space is mine. But I won't stop you directly. I'll simply present you with choices. What you choose determines whether you succeed or fail. It was the best deal they were going to get. Vince knew that. He also knew they were probably walking to their deaths. But doing nothing guaranteed failure. At least this way, they had a chance. We'll do it, Vince said. Excellent, Mr. Glass stepped aside, gesturing to the large mirror. Whenever you're ready. Vince and Ronnie approached the mirror together. Up close, the surface seemed to ripple like water. In the reflection, Vince could see himself and Ronnie. But he could also see deeper. Layers upon layers of reflected space, stretching back into infinity. Remember who you are, Ronnie said quietly. No matter what we see in there, remember. Same to you. They held hands and stepped forward. The mirror's surface gave way like passing through a curtain of ice water. There was a moment of disorientation, a sensation of falling even though Vince's feet remained solid on the ground. Then they were through. The reflection space looked like the crypt they'd just left, but wrong. The angles were off. The walls seemed to curve when they should be straight. And everywhere, mirrors. Thousands of them, stretching in all directions, each one showing a slightly different view. Behind them, the mirror they'd entered through showed the crypt and Mr. Glass watching them. His voice echoed from everywhere and nowhere. The game begins. Find the center. Free the victims. Or be lost forever. Good luck, Detective. Good luck, Miss Vale. Then the mirror clouded over and Vince and Ronnie were alone in the impossible space. They started walking, trying to keep straight even though straight seemed to be a relative concept here. Every mirror they passed showed different reflections. In some, they saw themselves as they were. In others, themselves as they might have been. Vince as a different kind of person, a criminal instead of a cop. Ronnie as someone who'd given up journalism to live a safe, quiet life. Versions and possibilities spinning out endlessly. Don't look too closely, Ronnie warned. That's how we get lost. We need to find something that stands out. Something that doesn't belong. They moved through the maze of mirrors, ignoring the reflections that called out to them. Vince saw his parents, dead for 10 years, waving from inside a mirror. He saw his ex-wife, the one who'd left him because the job consumed his life. He saw a version of himself that had taken bribes and looked the other way, living in a big house instead of a shabby apartment. All lies. All tricks. Beside him, Ronnie was fighting her own battles. He could see her eyes drawn to certain mirrors, her steps faltering. But she kept moving forward. Time was strange here. They might have been walking for minutes or hours. Vince's watch had stopped, the hands frozen at 3:30. The same time they'd entered the mirror room that final night. Then Ronnie stopped. Look, she pointed to a mirror that seemed darker than the others. In its reflection, they saw not themselves but shadows. The shapes Vince had glimpsed before. The victims, trapped and waiting. That's the way, Vince said. They stepped toward the dark mirror, but before they could reach it, their path was blocked. A figure emerged from one of the side mirrors. Then another. And another. Soon they were surrounded. The figures were them. Dozens of Vinces and Ronnies, each one slightly different. Some looked older. Some younger. Some wore different clothes or had different expressions. But all of them were blocking the path to the dark mirror. Which one is real? One of the Vinces asked. Which one deserves to continue? A Ronnie added. Only the true reflection can pass, they all said in unison. It was another test. Another trick. But Vince understood what Mr. Glass was doing. He was forcing them to question themselves. To doubt their own reality. If they couldn't tell which version of themselves was real, how could they navigate the reflection space? We're both real, Vince said firmly. These are just echoes, possibilities that never happened. The duplicates laughed. Are you sure? Maybe you're the echo. Maybe the real Vince gave up long ago. Maybe you're just a reflection that thinks it's alive. Vince felt doubt creeping in. Was he real? How could he know? In a space made entirely of reflections, what even defined reality? Then he felt Ronnie squeeze his hand. Solid. Warm. Real. Don't listen to them, she said. We know who we are. We remember how we got here. That makes us real. She was right. Memories. That's what defined them. Not what they looked like or what they might have become. But what they'd actually experienced and chosen. We remember, Vince said to the duplicates. That's the difference. You're just images. We're the ones who lived through everything that brought us here. The duplicates flickered. Their forms became less solid. And slowly, they faded, leaving the path clear. Vince and Ronnie ran for the dark mirror. As they got closer, they could see more clearly what was inside. The victims. Hundreds of them. All standing motionless in the reflected space, their eyes empty but aware. Trapped in a moment that never ended. They reached the mirror and Vince placed his hand on its surface. It was cold. So cold it burned. But he didn't pull away. How do we free them? Ronnie asked. The answer came not from Mr. Glass but from within. A knowledge that simply appeared in Vince's mind. The victims were trapped because they'd accepted the reflection as truth. They'd believed what they saw in the mirrors more than they believed in themselves. To free them, someone had to reject the reflection. To choose reality over illusion. But making that choice here, in the heart of Mr. Glass's power, would have consequences. One of us has to stay, Vince said, understanding flooding through him. That's the real game. We can free them all, but only if one of us takes their place. Becomes the anchor that holds the reflection space stable. That's not the deal we made, Ronnie protested. Mr. Glass said we had to reach the center. We have. He said we could free them all. We can. He didn't lie. He just didn't explain the cost. Vince could see it now, the cruel genius of the game. Mr. Glass had offered him a choice, knowing they'd take it out of heroism. And now they stood at the moment of truth. Save hundreds of people or condemn them all. I'll do it, Vince said. I'll stay, no. We both came in here. We both get out. Ronnie, listen to me. You're a journalist. You can tell this story. Make sure people know what happened. Make sure it doesn't happen again. I'm just a cop. A cop who couldn't stop any of this from happening in the first place. This is how I fix it. By sacrificing yourself. That's not fixing anything. That's just letting him win. He wins if nobody gets saved. This way, at least we save them. They stood at an impasse, both unwilling to let the other make the sacrifice. Time was running out. Vince could feel it. The reflection space was starting to collapse around them, Mr. Glass growing impatient with their hesitation. Then Ronnie did something Vince didn't expect. She pulled out her camera, the one she'd been carrying through this whole investigation. She raised it to the dark mirror and took a photograph. The flashbulb went off, bright and sudden in the dim reflection space. The flash illuminated everything. All the mirrors. All the victims. And for just a moment, Vince saw the truth. The victims weren't individuals. They were all connected. All part of the same trapped reflection. The space between mirrors wasn't filled with separate people. It was filled with one entity, fractured into hundreds of pieces. Mr. Glass's collection wasn't people. It was a single consciousness, shattered and imprisoned. He's not trapping victims, Ronnie said, seeing it too. He's trapping himself. Every person who enters the mirror adds to his power, but also fragments him further. He can't escape because he's spread across too many reflections. Understanding hit Vince like a physical blow. Mr. Glass had made this deal not to trap them but to free himself. If they chose to stay, if one of them became the new anchor, he could finally escape. He could leave the reflection space and become whole again in the real world. But if they both left, if they rejected his offer and refused to play by his rules, he'd remain fragmented. Trapped by his own game. We walk away, Vince said. Both of us. We don't save the victims because they were never separate from him in the first place. This whole thing has been him trying to trick us into setting him free. But those people are still trapped. Even if they're part of him now, they were real once. And freeing him would mean dooming countless others in the future. He'd just start over. New city, new mirror room, new victims. We can't let that happen. Ronnie looked at the dark mirror, at the faces pressed against the inside of the glass. People they'd tried to save. People they'd promised to help. There has to be another way. There isn't. Not one that doesn't play into his hands. The reflection space shuddered. Mr. Glass's voice boomed around them, no longer pleasant. Choose. Stay or condemn them all. We choose neither, Vince shouted back. We reject your game, The shuddering intensified. Mirrors began to crack. The floor tilted. Mr. Glass was losing control, his anger manifesting in the instability of the space itself. "You can't refuse. That's not how this works. You said we had to reach the center. We did. You said we could free the victims. You never said we had to. And you definitely never said we had to play by your rules." Vince grabbed Ronnie's hand. "We're leaving, now." They ran, not toward any specific mirror but simply away. The reflection space was collapsing around them, mirrors shattering, sending cascades of glass raining down. Behind them, Mr. Glass screamed, a sound that wasn't human at all but the shattering of reality itself. They dove through the nearest mirror, not knowing where it would take them. There was the same sensation of ice water, of falling, and then they hit solid ground. Vince opened his eyes to find himself lying in the old church crypt. The real one. Ronnie was beside him, breathing hard but alive. Around them, the mirrors that Mr. Glass had collected were cracking, spiderweb fractures spreading across their surfaces. They scrambled to their feet and ran for the ladder. Behind them, the sound of breaking glass grew to a crescendo. They climbed as fast as they could, emerging into the daylight just as the ground beneath them gave way. The entire crypt collapsed, taking all the mirrors with it. Dust and debris shot up from the hole, and then silence. Vince and Ronnie stood at the edge of the lot, covered in dirt and gasping for air. They looked at each other, hardly daring to believe they'd made it out. "Is he gone?" Ronnie asked. "I don't know. But his collection is destroyed. And without the mirrors, he can't reach through to our world anymore." They waited, half expecting Mr. Glass to appear, to reach out from some nearby reflection and pull them back in. But nothing happened. The day remained normal. The city continued its usual rhythm. Over the following weeks, strange things happened across Haven City. People who'd been missing for months suddenly reappeared, confused and disoriented but alive. They had no memory of where they'd been, just blank spaces in their recollection. The official explanations varied. Amnesia. Psychological breaks. One by one, the disappeared came home. Not all of them. Some were truly gone, their bodies found in unexpected places, deaths attributed to accidents or natural causes. But enough returned that it couldn't be ignored. Haven City had its missing people back, and nobody could quite explain why. Vince and Ronnie never told the full story. Who would believe it? Instead, they let the city make up its own explanations. Mass hysteria. Organized crime that had been broken up. Gas leaks causing hallucinations. People believed what they needed to believe to make sense of it all. The empty lot on 5th Street remained empty. No developers would touch it now. The ground was unstable, they said. Too dangerous to build on. It was fenced off and forgotten. Vince went back to being a detective. Ronnie went back to journalism. They'd see each other occasionally, meet for coffee or a quiet dinner. They never talked about the mirror room or what they'd seen in the reflection space. Some experiences were too big for words. But Vince noticed things had changed. When he looked in mirrors now, his reflection was just his reflection. No movement when he stood still. No figures lurking in the background. No sense that something was watching from the other side. Whatever connection Mr. Glass had established, it had been severed when the mirrors shattered. Still, Vince was careful. He avoided mirrors when he could. Covered the ones in his apartment at night. Never lingered too long looking at his own face. Because he remembered what Mr. Glass had said, that last moment before they'd escaped. "This isn't over, detective. I've existed for longer than your city. Longer than your civilization. I'll find another way through. Another collection. And when I do, I'll remember you." Vince didn't know if Mr. Glass had survived the collapse. The entity had been fragmented across hundreds of reflections, and when those mirrors shattered, logic said he should have been destroyed along with them. But Mr. Glass had never played by the rules of logic. He existed in the spaces between what was real and what was reflected. Maybe he was still out there somewhere, trapped but not gone. Waiting for someone to create new mirrors. New doorways. It was Ronnie who found the first indication that Mr. Glass's influence hadn't completely vanished. She'd been going through old records at the city library, following up on a different story, when she came across a mention of a traveling carnival that had visited Haven City in 1923. The carnival had featured a hall of mirrors. And during its 3-week stay, 7 people had disappeared. She brought the information to Vince. "I think he's been here longer than we thought," she said, spreading newspaper clippings across Vince's desk. The mirror room wasn't his first attempt in Haven City. He's been testing the waters for decades. Different methods, different approaches, but always involving mirrors and reflections. Vince studied the articles. The carnival had left town abruptly, its departure as mysterious as the disappearances. No forwarding address. No records of where it went next. Just gone, like it had never existed. "So this goes back further than the mirror room," Vince said. "Maybe further than we can trace, right? And if he's been doing this for decades, maybe centuries, then destroying one collection wouldn't stop him. It would just slow him down." "You think he's still active?" "I think entities like that don't die easily. We hurt him, definitely. Disrupted his plans. But kill him?" Ronnie shook her head. "I don't think that's possible. I think the best we can hope for is keeping him contained. Stopping him when he surfaces." It was a sobering thought. They hadn't won. They just survived one battle in what might be an eternal war. Over the next year, Vince and Ronnie made it their mission to track patterns. They collected reports from other cities, looking for similar incidents. Disappearances connected to entertainment venues. Strange clubs or carnivals or theaters where people went and never came back. The pattern was there if you knew how to look. Mr. Glass, or entities like him, operating in the shadows of civilization. Using humanity's vanity and curiosity against them. They found others who'd encountered similar phenomena. A detective in Chicago who'd investigated a series of disappearances at an exclusive theater in 1935. A journalist in New York who'd written about a private club where mirrors lined every wall. Most of these investigators had been dismissed or discredited. Their stories buried under official explanations and convenient excuses. But they'd all seen the truth. They'd all glimpsed what existed in the reflection space. Vince and Ronnie started compiling everything into a comprehensive document. A guide for anyone who might face Mr. Glass or something like him in the future. How to recognize the signs. How to resist the pull of the mirrors. How to fight back without getting trapped yourself. They called it the Mirror Protocol. It wasn't much. Just a collection of observations and hard-won knowledge. But it was something. A way to turn their experience into protection for others. They distributed copies quietly. To police departments in major cities. To journalists they trusted. To libraries and archives where it might be found by someone who needed it. Most people would dismiss it as fiction or paranoia. But a few, the ones who'd seen things they couldn't explain, would recognize it for what it was. A warning and a weapon. 2 years after the mirror room vanished, Vince got a call from a detective in Boston. There had been disappearances. A new nightclub. Mirrors everywhere. The detective had found a copy of the Mirror Protocol and wanted advice. Vince talked him through it. How to investigate without drawing too much attention. How to protect yourself from the reflection space. How to recognize when you were marked. And most importantly, how to destroy the collection without getting trapped. The Boston situation was resolved. The club shut down. The mirrors destroyed. No victims were saved, they'd been integrated too thoroughly into the entity's fragmented consciousness. But future victims were prevented. That counted for something. More calls came. Other cities. Other investigators who'd stumbled onto the same dark truth. Vince and Ronnie helped when they could, sharing what they'd learned. A network slowly formed. People who knew about the mirrors. Who understood the danger. Who were willing to stand against it. Haven City stayed quiet. The lot on 5th Street remained empty, a scar on the urban landscape that nobody wanted to acknowledge. But Vince checked on it regularly. Walking past at different times of day. Making sure nothing was trying to resurface. The ground above the collapsed crypt never settled quite right. Sometimes, on foggy nights, Vince swore he could see lights moving beneath the surface. Reflections with no source. Echoes of what had been trapped there. He never investigated too closely. Some doors, once closed, should stay that way. Ronnie continued her journalism, but she'd shifted focus. Instead of chasing corruption and scandal, she wrote about the stories nobody else would touch. Unexplained disappearances. Patterns in missing persons cases. Strange entertainment venues with dark histories. She never mentioned mirrors directly, never laid out the full truth. But she planted seeds. Made people ask questions. Gave them enough information to protect themselves if they ever encountered something like the mirror room. Her editors thought she'd gone soft. Writing about fringe topics instead of hard news. But Ronnie didn't care. She'd seen what real investigative journalism could cost. She'd stood in the reflection space and nearly lost herself. If her new focus was considered eccentric, so be it. At least she was doing something that mattered. 3 years after their confrontation with Mr. Glass, Vince was promoted to lieutenant. It came with a desk job and less fieldwork, which suited him fine. He was getting older. Tired. The years of stress and irregular sleep were catching up. And the memories of the mirror room, while fading, never completely left. He still avoided mirrors when possible. Ronnie published a book. Fiction, she called it. A noir mystery about a detective and a journalist investigating disappearances at a nightclub. The critics praised her imagination. The atmospheric setting. The creative twist ending where the heroes chose to walk away rather than play the villain's game. No one guessed it was all true. The book sold modestly. Not a bestseller, but enough to keep it in circulation. Enough that someone searching for answers might find it. Ronnie had seeded it with clues. References to the Mirror Protocol. Details that anyone who'd actually encountered the reflection space would recognize. It was her way of reaching out to others who'd seen what she'd seen. Letting them know they weren't alone. 5 years after the mirror room vanished, Vince retired from the police force. He'd done his time. Solved his cases. Made whatever difference he could make. Now he wanted peace. A quiet life without the weight of other people's tragedies on his shoulders. He bought a small house on the outskirts of Haven City. No mirrors except the absolutely necessary ones, and those were kept covered when not in use. He spent his days reading and tending a small garden. He'd earned the rest. But even in retirement, he kept the Mirror Protocol updated. New information came in regularly from the network they'd established. Sightings. Incidents. Close calls. The fight against Mr. Glass and entities like him continued. Vince was no longer on the front lines, but he could still contribute. Ronnie visited often. She'd never married, never settled down. The investigation had changed her too fundamentally. How could you go back to normal life after seeing what existed in the spaces between reflections? How could you care about ordinary things when you knew the world was so much stranger and more dangerous than anyone suspected? They'd sit on Vince's porch, drinking coffee and watching the sunset. Sometimes they'd talk about the old days. The investigation. The descent into the mirror room. Their escape from the reflection space. Other times they'd sit in comfortable silence, two people who'd been through something together that no one else could understand. On the 5th anniversary of the mirror room's disappearance, they visited the empty lot on 5th Street. It looked the same as always. Overgrown. Forgotten. A nothing space in the middle of the city that everyone unconsciously avoided. They stood at the fence, looking at the ground where the crypt had collapsed. "Do you think he's really gone?" Ronnie asked. "No," Vince said. "I think he's scattered. Weakened. But not gone. Something that's existed as long as he has doesn't die easily. So he could come back, eventually. Maybe not in our lifetime. But yeah, eventually. Then we need to make sure people are ready. That the Mirror Protocol doesn't get lost or forgotten. We've done what we can. Distributed it widely enough that it'll survive. Someone will find it when they need it." Ronnie nodded, but she looked troubled. "I keep thinking about the people we couldn't save. The ones who were integrated into him. Are they still conscious? Still aware? Trapped forever in that fragmented existence? I don't know. I hope not. I hope when the mirrors shattered, they found peace. Whatever peace is possible after something like that." They stood in silence for a while longer, paying their respects to the victims. The ones they'd known about and the countless others throughout history who'd fallen into Mr. Glass's collection. Then they turned and walked away, leaving the empty lot behind. Life went on. Haven City grew and changed. New buildings rose where old ones had stood. New people arrived while others left. The city's memory was short, as all cities' memories are. Within a few years, most people had forgotten about the strange disappearances of 1941. The ones who remembered chalked it up to wartime paranoia. Mass hysteria. An unfortunate chapter in the city's history, Best left in the past. But Vince and Ronnie remembered. And so did the small network of investigators they'd connected with. People who'd faced similar threats in other cities. Who'd looked into mirrors and seen things looking back. Who understood that the world was stranger and more dangerous than the public would ever know. They kept watch. Kept collecting information. Kept updating the mirror protocol. Because they knew Mr. Glass would return someday. Maybe not to Haven City. Maybe not in the form of a nightclub. But he would return. Entities like that always did. 7 years after the mirror room vanished, Vince got a letter. No return address. Postmarked from a small town in upstate New York. Inside was a single photograph and a note. The photograph showed a new establishment. A sleek, modern building with a sign that read, "The Glass House, Members Only," and in the window, barely visible, a reflection that shouldn't have been there. A man in a gray suit with glasses. Ordinary looking. Forgettable. The note read, "It's starting again. Please help." Vince stared at the photograph for a long time. He was 62 years old. Retired. He'd earned his peace. He'd done his duty. Someone else could handle this. But even as he thought it, he knew he wouldn't walk away. Couldn't walk away. Because 7 years ago, he'd made a choice. To fight instead of surrender. To protect instead of ignore. And that choice didn't come with an expiration date. He called Ronnie. "I know," she said before he could speak. "I got one too. Different city. Same pattern. He's not just coming back. He's coming back everywhere. All at once. Looks like it. The question is, what do we do about it?" Vince looked at the photograph again. The ordinary man in the window. The promise of exclusivity and secrets. The bait that would lure in new victims. We do what we've always done. We fight. And we make sure others know how to fight too. We're too old for this, Vince. Probably. But we're also the only ones who know what we're up against. Who else is going to do it? Ronnie was quiet for a moment. Then she laughed, a tired sound but genuine. "You're right. Of course you're right. When do we leave? Tomorrow? I'll pick you up at dawn." Just like old times. Just like old times. Vince hung up and looked at himself in the small mirror by his phone. His reflection looked back. Older. Grayer. More lined and weathered. But still him. Still real. Still fighting. And in the reflection, just for a moment, he saw something else. A flash of movement. A hint of a smile that wasn't his own. Mr. Glass was back. And he was waiting. But this time, Vince and Ronnie weren't alone. They had knowledge. They had experience. And they had a network of people ready to stand against the darkness. The war wasn't over. It might never be over. But they'd won the first battle. And they'd keep winning battles, one at a time, for as long as they could. Because someone had to stand between the world and what lurked in the spaces between reflections. Someone had to look into the mirrors and refuse to be pulled through. Someone had to fight. And Vincent Mallory and Veronica Vale had proven they were willing to be those someones. They'd packed their bags. Loaded up Vince's car. And as the sun rose over Haven City, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, They drove out toward whatever waited for them. The empty lot on 5th Street remained empty. The ground above the collapsed crypt stayed unstable. And sometimes, on quiet nights when the city slept, lights could be seen moving beneath the surface. Reflections with no source. Echoes of what had been trapped there. But the lot was watched now. Protected. If Mr. Glass ever tried to return to Haven City, to rebuild his collection on that cursed ground, people would be ready. The network Vince and Ronnie had built would endure. The mirror protocol would be passed down. And future generations would know what to watch for. How to recognize the signs. How to fight back. It wasn't a perfect solution. It wasn't even a permanent one. But it was something. A thin line of defense against the darkness. A warning system for threats most people never knew existed. And sometimes, that's all you can do. Stand your ground. Share what you know. And trust that when the darkness comes again, someone will be ready to face it. The story of the mirror room on 5th Street became legend in certain circles. A cautionary tale shared among investigators and journalists who dealt with the unexplained. Some dismissed it as fiction. Others recognized the truth hidden in the details. But everyone who heard it remembered one thing: never trust a reflection more than you trust yourself. Because in the space between what is and what appears to be, monsters wait. And they're always hungry for new additions to their collection. Vincent Mallory and Veronica Vale drove into the sunrise, ready to face whatever came next. Behind them, Haven City woke to a new day. Ordinary people going about ordinary lives. Unaware of what had happened. Unaware of what had been prevented. And maybe that was okay. Maybe the world needed people like Vince and Ronnie to stand in the darkness so others could live in the light. To know the truth so others could enjoy ignorance. It was a lonely calling. A thankless one. But it was necessary. And as Vince drove, watching the city fade in his rearview mirror, he thought about all the victims they'd failed to save. All the people trapped in Mr. Glass's fragmented consciousness. And he made a promise. He'd keep fighting. Keep learning. Keep looking for a way to truly destroy the entity and free its victims. Not just scatter it or seal it away. But end it permanently. It might take years. It might take the rest of his life. But he'd find a way. Because that's what detectives do. They solve cases. And the case of the mirror room, the case of Mr. Glass and his reflection space, wasn't closed. Not yet. It was just waiting. Waiting for someone to find the final piece. The key that would unlock the mystery and end the threat forever. And somewhere, in a small town in upstate New York, in a sleek modern building called the Glass House, a man in a gray suit stood in front of a mirror and smiled. The game was beginning again. New players. New victims. New collection. But this time, he faced opponents who knew his tricks. Who'd walked through his maze and escaped. Who'd refused to play by his rules. It would make victory all the sweeter. Mr. Glass raised a glass of champagne to his reflection. The reflection raised its glass back. And in the silvered space between them, shadows moved. Waiting. Hungry. Patient. The mirrors of Haven City might be broken. But mirrors existed everywhere. In every city. In every home. In every surface that showed a reflection. And Mr. Glass had all the time in the world. The end was coming. Not today. Not tomorrow. But eventually. One day, someone would find the way to truly destroy him. To shatter not just his collection but his very existence. Until then, he'd continue his work. Collecting souls. Building his fragmented empire. Testing the boundaries between worlds. And Vincent Mallory and Veronica Vale would continue theirs. Fighting. Protecting. Standing against the darkness. Two sides of an eternal conflict. Hunter and hunted. Detective and monster. Reality and reflection. The story of the Mirror Room on 5th Street was over. But the larger story, the one that had been playing out for centuries, continued. And somewhere, in the space between what is and what appears to be, the game went on. If you want to know more, watch the next video.